Have you ever been consumed with judgment toward someone, only to realize later that they touched something raw inside you? That the fault you saw in them was strangely familiar? That their presence disturbed you not because of who they were, but what they mirrored? We often believe we are reacting to others, but in truth, we are responding to ourselves through them. Our rejections, our frustrations, our harshest opinions are not random. They are rooted in what we cannot face within, and so we displace it outward. You may think you dislike arrogance, but maybe what you fear is your own desire to be seen. You may think someone is too emotional, but perhaps it is your own vulnerability you cannot bear. Blame becomes the shield. Projection becomes the story. Carl Jung warned us, what you deny within becomes what you fight outside. You do not see others clearly. You see through the filter of your unacknowledged self. And so the people around you become characters in a drama your unconscious is still writing. But what if every conflict was a call to awareness? What if the people you resist most carry a message? What if your blame is not about them, but about the part of you waiting to be reclaimed, the part you left behind, now begging to return home? Carl Jung was not a man of surface answers. He did not ask how to be liked or how to be happy. He asked how to be whole, how to face the truth that lives beneath the mask, how to become who you truly are, not who you pretend to be. A student of Freud, Jung walked away when the path became too narrow. He believed the human soul was more than instinct. It was myth, meaning, memory. He saw the unconscious not just as repressed pain, but as a vast inner world full of symbols and forgotten truths. He gave us the language for what we feel but cannot name, the shadow, the projection, the complex. He taught that what you run from does not disappear. It waits. It influences your choices. It appears in your relationships. It governs your fate until you face it. Jung did not point fingers. He held up mirrors. He showed us that the people who disturb us are not obstacles but invitations. They reflect what we have disowned, what we have denied, what we secretly long to understand and reclaim. More than a psychologist, Jung was a guide into the interior. He believed the purpose of life was not to be free of conflict, but to learn from it. Not to escape the unconscious, but to illuminate it. Not to banish the shadow, but to integrate it. In a world obsessed with projecting blame, Jung's work brings us back to responsibility. He reminds us that until we face ourselves, we will keep fighting ghosts. And we will keep calling them people. No child is born ashamed of their emotions. But from a very young age, we learn what is welcome and what is not. We learn to smile when we feel afraid. We learn to please to be safe. We learn to hide what makes others uncomfortable. A parent frowns when we express anger. A teacher praises us when we are quiet. A friend pulls away when we cry. Slowly, we begin to internalize a message that some parts of us are lovable and others are dangerous. To survive, the self fragments. We push our unacceptable thoughts underground. We disown our anger, our jealousy, our fear of being small. Not because we want to lie to ourselves, but because the truth once felt too costly to bear. What is denied does not vanish, it retreats. It sinks into the unconscious where it begins to take shape as the shadow. It becomes what we cannot see in ourselves, but what we feel drawn to or repulsed by in others. Denial is not weakness. It is protection. A strategy the psyche forms to preserve love and belonging. But in protecting us from pain, it also robs us of truth. It splits the self in two, the person we show and the person we bury. Jung saw this division everywhere, in individuals, in families, in cultures. What we cannot face inside ourselves, we often fight outside ourselves. We call it wrong. We call it evil. We declare war on what was once a part of us. And so denial becomes the quiet seed of all judgment. It whispers that we are only what is good, clean, admirable, and anything else must not belong. But what you exile from awareness will find another way to return. usually through someone else. Not all parts of the self are given equal permission to exist. Some traits are celebrated, others are shamed. The shadow begins where acceptance ends. It is formed from the pieces of ourselves that were too risky to express, too painful to reveal. Anger is one of the first to go, especially if you were taught that kindness is the highest virtue. You learn to smile while suppressing the fire, but buried anger does not die. It distorts. It leaks through sarcasm, through passive aggression, through cold withdrawal. Envy is denied too, because it feels weak. So instead of owning our desire, we mock what we want in others. We call them shallow, arrogant, undeserving. But deep down, it is our unlived life that aches. Envy is the shadow of longing unspoken. Fear is often silenced. Especially in environments where strength is praised, vulnerability becomes taboo. We hide behind confidence, behind logic, behind perfection. But fear buried becomes rigidity. And under that, fragility grows. Even joy can be denied, especially in homes ruled by anxiety or survival. You learn not to be too loud, too free, too hopeful. You learn that safety lies in control. And so the playful, radiant part of you hides. It becomes a stranger in your own body. We also deny our ambition, our sexuality, our creativity, our hunger for recognition, anything that might upset the image we built to survive. And over time, the self we show becomes thinner, while the shadow self becomes dense with life unlived. Jung saw that the shadow was not just negative traits. It was all unlived potential. Everything repressed, both light and dark. Your courage may be in there, so may your voice. Your sensuality, your madness, your brilliance. The shadow is not just a burden, it is a treasure. But as long as we continue to deny it, we keep projecting it. We keep blaming others for being too loud, too proud, too needy. When in truth, they are often mirroring the very things we were once told we could never be. The ego's first job is to protect, to build identity, to help us belong. But when parts of the self are denied, the ego does not erase them, it hides them. And when those denied parts rise again, the ego deflects them onto someone else. Blame is the ego's favorite shield. It allows us to stay good in our own story. If someone else is wrong, then we do not have to be flawed. If they are too much, then we get to be just right. Blame protects the image we have built. This mechanism is mostly unconscious. You do not wake up and decide to project. It happens automatically. A person irritates you. A trait disturbs you. But instead of examining why, you assign the problem to them. They become the container for what you cannot face. This is why judgment can feel so righteous. It feeds the ego. It reinforces the story that we are the clear ones and they are the problem. But beneath that confidence is often something fragile, something hurt, something hiding. Carl Jung taught that blame is not the end of a thought. It is the beginning of self-inquiry. When you blame, ask what truth inside you is being covered. What would it mean to drop the defense and meet the emotion directly? Because blaming others gives you a temporary sense of control, but it also keeps you stuck. You remain in the cycle of reaction. You fight symptoms instead of facing the cause. And the unconscious wins again. Blame keeps the ego comfortable. But healing asks us to become uncomfortable, to break the pattern. To say maybe this tension is not about them. Maybe it is something inside me that I have not yet learned to name. Blame makes emotional sense long before it makes logical sense. When something inside us feels intolerable, the mind seeks relief. It does not search for the truth. It searches for distance. It tries to move the discomfort outward, toward someone else. If you feel powerless, it is easier to call someone controlling. If you feel ashamed, it is easier to accuse someone of arrogance. Blame lets us convert vulnerability into offense. It turns inner pain into external conflict. And for a while, it works. That is why projection is so seductive. It brings temporary clarity. You no longer feel confused, you feel certain. You think the other person is the problem, but the real problem is unspoken. It lives in your body. It hides beneath the surface of your reaction. The ego needs a clean story, a role to play. And blame assigns you the innocent part. You are the one being misunderstood, disrespected, neglected. This role comforts the ego, but it limits the soul. It traps you in repetition instead of transformation. Carl Jung saw that the human psyche often favors familiarity over truth. If blaming others helped you feel safe in childhood, you may still do it as an adult. Not because it is wise, but because it is known. And what is known feels safe. But emotional safety built on projection is fragile. It requires the world to behave a certain way. It demands others to stay small so you can feel big. It asks life to protect you from your own reflection, and life will not cooperate. Healing begins when you recognize the emotional logic of blame. You see that it was never really about them. It was about a part of you that did not know where else to go, a feeling with no home, a voice that had been silenced for years. To stop blaming is not to excuse others. It is to awaken yourself, to feel the pain before you assign it, to name the emotion before you export it, to meet what rises with presence instead of projection. That is the moment blame loses its grip. Projection is not random. It follows a pattern as precise as mathematics. There are people who trigger you over and over. Different names, different faces, but somehow the same emotional response. That repetition is not about them. It is a map of you. You keep meeting the same archetype, the critic, the narcissist, the weak one, the selfish one. And every time you see them, you react, not just with judgment, but with intensity. The kind of reaction that reveals a deeper story beneath the surface. Your mind says they are the problem, but your body is trying to tell you something else, that this feeling is familiar, that this wound is old, that long before they appeared, something in you had already been hurt in this way. Carl Jung taught that we project most strongly onto people who represent our unlived self. That includes both what we fear and what we secretly desire. Sometimes we hate what we envy. Sometimes we attack what we once lost. To recognize the pattern, you must watch your reactions, not just your words, but your tone, your energy, your speed of judgment. Projection rarely whispers. It bursts, it floods. It grabs your attention like a fire alarm in the soul. Ask yourself, why does this person bother me so much? Why now? Why this trait? Why this intensity? The question is not, are they wrong? The question is, what do they awaken in me that I have not yet made peace with? Projection becomes clear when you realize how often you feel the same way with different people. You may change environments, but the feeling follows. That is your clue. The common denominator is not them. It is you. This is not self-blame. It is self-responsibility. The goal is not to deny others' flaws. It is to stop outsourcing your emotional world, to realize that your reaction is your teacher, that your judgment may be your mirror. Until you see the pattern, you remain trapped in the story. You fight what you refuse to feel. You judge what you have not yet integrated. You replay the same drama, expecting a new outcome. But healing begins the moment you look inward. Projection often wears a familiar mask. It looks like moral outrage. It sounds like certainty. It feels like instinct. But beneath it is often something disowned. A trait, a fear, a desire that we could not allow ourselves to carry consciously. One of the most common projections is control. We see others as manipulative, overpowering, too intense. But often, what we truly resist is our own hunger for control, our own fear of losing it, or our own history of being silenced. Another is weakness. We may look down on people we see as overly sensitive or dependent, but sometimes we are rejecting our own vulnerability. The part of us that once needed and did not receive. The softness we learned to suppress. Arrogance is a common target. We judge people who speak boldly or take up space. But what if what we really fear is our own power, our own voice, our own longing to be recognized, which we buried long ago in the name of humility? We may also project neediness, especially if we were taught to be independent at all costs. We feel repelled by people who ask for too much. But what we are really running from is the child within who was never allowed to ask for anything at all. Even joy gets projected. We dismiss others as naive or shallow for being too enthusiastic. But underneath that judgment may live a deep grief, the loss of our own spontaneity, the abandonment of a part of us that once laughed freely. Carl Jung saw that projection often reveals our unlived life, the life we suppressed to survive, the identity we gave up to belong. When we see someone embodying what we exiled, we react, not because they are wrong, but because we are unfree. The key is not to stop noticing flaws in others. The key is to ask why certain flaws sting more than others, why they return again and again, and what they are trying to show us about the places we still fear to look. When you project, you are seeing someone else through the lens of your past, through the lens of your pain. But if you pause, if you listen, you can begin to reclaim what was lost. You can stop fighting ghosts and start remembering who you were before you denied yourself. There comes a moment when the pattern becomes unbearable. You realize you are repeating yourself through different people, different places, different faces, but the same reaction, the same pain, the same conflict. And you begin to wonder, what if this has always been about me? Radical responsibility begins here. Not in shame, not in guilt, but in truth. The willingness to stop the story, to pause the reaction, to say, I am the common thread. I am the one who keeps showing up in my own projections. It does not mean others are innocent. It means you stop outsourcing your transformation. You stop waiting for them to change so you can feel safe. You start taking your power back by owning what you once blamed. Responsibility is not self-blame. It is self-liberation. You no longer need to defend yourself against the mirror. You begin to ask, what part of me is speaking right now? What wound is moving through me? What truth have I refused to sit with? Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That irritation is not weakness, it is invitation. A signal that something deeper is calling to be named, felt, and seen with courage. This is the moment of the inner shift. When you move from reaction to reflection. When you pause before blaming and ask, what is mine in this pain? What belongs to the other? And what belongs to the shadow I left behind? Radical responsibility is not comfortable. It strips you of the easy story. It humbles the ego. But in return, it gives you clarity. It restores integrity. You begin to respond to life instead of reliving the past through others. And slowly, projection loses its grip. You stop needing someone else to carry your disowned parts. You stop waging war on the mirror. You begin to return home to yourself, fully, fiercely, finally. Turning inward is an act of courage. It requires you to stop chasing resolution in others and begin searching for meaning in yourself. It is a reversal of habit. Instead of asking what they did to you, you ask what truth in you is surfacing. When you point outward, you create distance. You make the other the enemy, the cause, the obstacle. But when you turn inward, the distance collapses. You come face to face with your own vulnerability, your old wounds, your unmet needs, your denied emotions. This is not easy work. It asks you to sit in discomfort, to hold confusion without rushing to fix it, to feel anger without blaming, to feel sadness without hiding, to meet yourself not as a problem to solve, but as a presence to witness. Carl Jung understood that healing does not come from correcting the world. It comes from integrating the self. The outer world only triggers what the inner world has left unresolved. And so every reaction becomes a signpost pointing home. You begin to replace blame with curiosity. Instead of saying they are so selfish, you ask, why does that quality upset me so much? Instead of they never listen, you ask, where have I abandoned my own voice? These questions open doors. Inward attention builds awareness, and awareness softens judgment. You see others not as threats, but as reflections. You recognize their pain without making it your burden. And you recognize your pain without making it their fault. Projection dissolves when presence takes its place. You stop rehearsing old stories and start listening to new truths. You stop reacting from the wound and start responding from the whole. You stop fighting others and start including yourself. To turn inward is to reclaim your authorship. You become the narrator of your inner life instead of a character in someone else's drama. You choose integrity over instinct. And with time, you begin to walk through conflict with less fear and more freedom. When you finally take back what you once projected, a quiet revolution begins. The people who once disturbed you lose their power. Their behavior may not change, but your relationship to it does. You are no longer at war with their reflection of you. You begin to respond instead of react. The emotional charge fades. The urgency to judge dissolves. Where there was once blame, now there is space. Space to breathe, to choose, to feel without fear, to see others without distortion. Owning what you blamed feels like loss at first. You lose the comfort of the old story. You lose the illusion of being right. But what you gain is far greater. You gain yourself. The parts you exiled return. The shame begins to lift. The shadow starts to integrate. Carl Jung believed that wholeness comes not from perfection, but from inclusion. Every reclaimed emotion, every accepted flaw, every integrated trait becomes part of your inner unity. You are no longer fragmented. You are no longer running. This integration brings a new kind of power. Not the power to control others, the power to stay rooted in yourself. The power to face discomfort without defense. The power to love without losing your center. The power to meet conflict without abandoning your clarity. You also become more compassionate. Because when you recognize your own darkness, you no longer need to condemn it in others. Judgment softens. Empathy rises. You begin to see behind the mask of those around you, because you have finally faced your own. This is the birth of inner authority. You no longer seek validation through blame or identity through opposition. You know who you are because you have met who you were afraid to be. And that knowing makes you unshakable. Carl Jung did not see the shadow as something to eliminate. He saw it as something to redeem. The shadow is not only where our pain lives, it is where our power sleeps. It holds the life we have not yet dared to live. What you repress often contains what you most need. Behind your anger may be your boundaries. Behind your envy, your unlived dreams. Behind your fear, your hidden courage. The shadow is not just a wound, it is also a doorway. The more you run from it, the more it controls you. But when you turn toward it, everything changes. The energy once spent in avoidance becomes fuel for transformation. You stop collapsing into reaction. You begin to stand in your truth. Integration is the opposite of suppression. It is not indulging the shadow, but listening to it, learning from it, welcoming it as a guide instead of treating it as a threat. This is the work of the soul, the path of depth, not perfection. Jung believed that power without shadow becomes arrogance, but shadow without awareness becomes destruction. True power comes from embracing both, knowing your darkness and still choosing the light, knowing your flaws and still showing up with integrity. This is not a theory, it is a lived experience. You feel more whole, you feel more awake. The world no longer feels like a battlefield. It becomes a mirror, not to judge you, but to reveal you, to call you back to yourself again and again. When you begin to see your shadow as your teacher, blame dissolves. Conflict becomes a message. Triggers become invitations. And life stops being a fight to be good enough. It becomes a practice of being fully human. What if the person you cannot stand is the one sent to show you yourself? What if the one you judge most deeply carries the exact trait you have yet to reclaim? Not to torment you, but to reflect you, to reveal what you once buried. Carl Jung believed that the outer world mirrors the inner world, not as a metaphor, as a psychological fact. The people who trigger you are not random. They are messengers. They are guides in disguise. They carry the parts of you you refuse to meet. When someone disturbs you, pause. Instead of asking what is wrong with them, ask what is this revealing in me? This question changes everything. It breaks the cycle of blame. It interrupts the story of separation, and it begins the story of wholeness. The people we resist most often carry the gift of clarity. They help us see where we are still fragmented, where we still carry shame, where we still pretend to be smaller or purer than we really are. That confrontation is sacred. You do not need to agree with them. You do not need to invite them into your life, but you can thank them, not with words, with awareness, with willingness, with the quiet inner act of saying, I see now what I was avoiding, and I am ready to grow. Carl Jung never taught us how to be perfect. He taught us how to be whole. To be a full human being means carrying contradictions, light and shadow, strength and tenderness, wisdom and confusion. Healing does not remove the dark. It brings it into the light. The quest for perfection is a mask. It hides our shame. It fuels our blame. It demands we look spotless on the outside while denying what cries out inside. But wholeness is different. It says everything belongs. Even the broken, even the buried, even the unloved. To be whole is to know yourself fully and still choose love. To meet your own shadow and say, I see you. I will not exile you anymore. You belong here, your rage, your longing, your wounds, your brilliance. Nothing needs to be hidden now. This is not the end of struggle, but it is the end of self-rejection. You stop abandoning yourself to be accepted. You stop blaming others to feel innocent. You begin living from the center of who you truly are, not who the world told you to be. In this space, healing becomes integrity, growth becomes return, and conflict becomes a doorway, not to attack, not to escape, but to transform, because now you are no longer split. You are standing in the quiet, powerful presence of your full self. What if the part of you blame in others is the part that is still waiting to come home? What if all this time, the person you judged most deeply was only a mirror, reflecting a self you once had to leave behind? Carl Jung believed that the greatest journey is not outward but inward, that what we see in others is never neutral. It is charged with the meaning we refuse to face. And behind every judgment lies a hidden longing for wholeness. So pause now. Ask yourself, what am I still blaming? What part of me have I not yet allowed to exist? What feeling, what voice, what desire have I pushed into the dark? And how often have I seen it walking around in someone else? Healing does not begin with self-improvement. It begins with self-honesty. The courage to stop blaming and start seeing. To stop pointing and start listening. To ask not how can I change others, but how can I meet what I have feared in myself? The next time judgment rises, do not rush to explain it. Sit with it, feel it, follow it inward, and maybe you will hear a whisper, a voice long forgotten, saying, I am still here. I have always been here. Will you see me now?